Vincent and I'm an aeromodeller and an engineer. Join me on a fascinating journey where I show you some of the techniques used in scale aeromodelling. What I thought we might look at now is something that's quite common to many ARTFs or many scale models, and that's how do we dress the wheels up? How do we make the wheels look a little bit more realistic? Okay, so what I've got here this is a typical wheel that you can get from people like Hobby King, China Hobbies, and all sorts of places all around the world. And it's quite a nice little wheel, but the inside is rock hard. Well, not rock hard, but it's bloody hard. But the beauty of these wheels is they come apart. So the center, these covers that you can see pop off. There's a blank one for the back. So the covers come off, which is good. And then what you're left with, you can just see them there. There's 3 screws that hold the halves of the wheel together. So you end up with 2 hubs. And you can machine these on the lathe, and I'll show you that in a minute. If you look at the tyre itself, it's a little bit softer once you've got the hub off. But what I did with my Chipmunk, my first control line Chipmunk, is if you look inside, you can actually open the tyre. And inside, there's a foam donut. Now, if you take the foam donut out, you can get it out. There we go. Take the foam donut out, and that's what gives the tyre its squishiness. Now, you've got to be careful with this, because if somebody comes along and decides they want to squash your tyres, they can force the air out of the tyres, and you end up with a flat spot. So you are removing a lot of the springiness out of your tyres. Now, if that's a problem for you, and I like it because when the model sits on the ground, the tyre actually deforms slightly, which is what the full size would do. So I'm not sure whether it gets me extra marks. It should do, but it maybe doesn't. What you could do if you really do want something that's got a little bit more stiffness to this is make another donut, but in something softer than this. And I would suggest you use something like the neoprene cord of a round section, and join it together with CA, and then pop that inside there, and that'll give you a stiffer wheel than that. But that's how I like it. I like it empty, and just with the caveat of telling people don't squash the wheel. So if we take that wheel apart, then we can use something that I've shown you before. On the lathe, using Chemiwood, I turned some wheel discs. Now they look quite complicated, but they're not. It's a very simple turning on the lathe with Chemiwood. And then the nuts and bolts are simply real nuts and bolts drilled into the Chemiwood and fitted. And then when I made the mold, obviously I left the nuts and bolts there, and it gives me a pattern to make repeatable numbers of these wheel covers. These are actually to 1/6 scale, but they're close enough to my 1/5 scale Chipmunk, because the wheels are a little bit possibly undersized, that these will work nicely. So what I need to do is I need to take half of the rim off that, and a chunk off of the other half has an axle protruding, a molded axle. So I need to take a lump off the axle as well, so that hub cover can sit flush in there. Then we can reassemble the wheel with these glued to that surface, and you will have, to all intents and purposes, a very scale looking wheel. Okay, so we'll go over to the lathe and we'll turn one of these hubs down. You don't really need to do the other, just the one side. I think we're ready to go. So all I'm going to do is turn half of that lip off and half of that bearing shaft. Oh, but not with it spinning like that. It's only plastic, so it doesn't have to be held particularly tight, but I think this should be fine. There we go. quite often have to be very careful with plastic because it can shatter, and it doesn't tend to cut. It either melts or shatters. So sneak up on it is my answer. I could actually make these in aluminium, I'm sure. They're very simple. You can see what's happening. It's actually melting the plastic rather than turning it. So what you have to do, I should have done it a little bit sooner when we started picking up on the edges. Let's just try and clean it up with a knife, scalpel. Might even be able to get in there with the lathe, with the tool. This is the problem, and in some ways it would be easier to make it in metal. It's actually looking like we need to remove just about all of that flange. So I am going to try. I'm going to try upping the speed a bit. See if the increased speed helps. It does actually seem to be cutting slightly better. So maybe I was going too slowly before. No, maybe not. Seems to. So we've effectively removed all of that face, all that flange that's stuck out. So the wheel cover will now sit flat on that, just like that. So here we are back on the bench. That's one side. This is the reshaped t'other side. Now what we may have an issue with is the screws intruding on this side. So we'll get our deflated tyre. The tyre is actually trapped, that lip is actually trapped in there. And that's kind of what seals it, so if somebody squeezes it, it forces the air out. So you may have to slacken these 3 screws off, let the tyre form again to its proper shape. Before doing the screws up again. So here are the 3 screws. That's just a case of them falling out again. Finding the correct position for the screws. So I'm going to do it this way. You can see the screw is there. what I'm hoping is that we won't have much screw showing through. And there is spring, you know, there's enough for you to use it quite happily, but if somebody really squeezes it, they can force the air out. But you see what we've done? We've recessed the side now. So when we take our wheel cover, we can simply bond it to this plastic disc. You could also recess a bit more of that where those screws are, or you could shorten the screws even, because it just needs to sit down a little bit lower. Shortening the screws is probably the best way, to be honest. If I do them right up, see how much we need to lose. So it's about 1/8 that we need to lose. Yeah, so I'm going to lose 1/8 or maybe 2 or 3 mil off the end of all the screws, and that'll make this a little bit less pronounced. So join me again in a minute once I've done that. In a typical ARTF, you would have collets on a shaft, and the shaft would lock onto the leg. So what you do, don't use that pin with collets. Get yourself a nice, in this case it's a M4 screw, and you can get them in different lengths so that the smooth bit and the threaded bit are different sizes. Just find the ones you want. These are from Model Fixings, company in the UK. And the beauty is, because the wheel is now sliding on a smooth shaft, which is great. Like that. But what it does mean is you haven't got an unsightly collet up against the outside. And if you really want to be clever, you could actually machine or use hex head screws. So there's an octagonal shape in there, which is actually very typical of what the full size has. Is quite a big nut with locking with a locking pin. So that's how it's going to look. Much better, I think you'll say, you'll agree, than a collet on the end of a shaft. And then you lock this end. You might need another collet on the inside there to give you spacing away from the oleo. In fact, that's exactly what I'll do. And then I'll tighten up the Allen key in the leg to match that, and then I'll cut the excess off. And there you go. That's basically how you do all this. So what I'm going to do next is just make sure the other one fits as well. Yeah, it's really the hole in the middle, to make sure the hole in the middle is big enough. So what I'll do first, before I bond all these together, is I'll make the other hub on the lathe to fit, and then I'll spray these with a nice silver colour, and then we can do the final assembly of the wheels. So there we have the finished wheel. Worked very well, don't you think? It's quite simple to make. I did subsequently find out that the wheel compressed on landing, and after 3 or 4 takeoffs and landings I had to let air back into the tyre.